Hello everyone and welcome back to GreenStat Asia webinar series. My name is Prasadini Singh. I work as an energy analyst and I coordinate our activities at GreenStat in Sri Lanka. It's wonderful to see many of you joining us today from the different part of the world. Thank you for making the time to be with us. Today's session is titled State of Global Green Hydrogen Projects, a Techno-Commercial Review. We will be exploring the global landscape of green hydrogen projects, looking at the latest technologies, business models, and regulations that are shaping the sector. We will also touch on opportunities and challenges for scaling up with insights from real-world case studies. Just before we get started, let me briefly introduce who we are. GreenStat Asia is a consulting company dedicated to renewable energy with a special focus on green hydrogen. Our Center of Excellence for Hydrogen, based here in Sri Lanka, is committed to knowledge sharing, capacity building, and global collaboration. We work closely with universities and international experts to advance hydrogen technology and safety policy and the entire hydrogen value chain. It's now my pleasure to warmly welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Rahul Nabar. Dr. Rahul Nabar is an engineering consultant and adjunct professor in the Department of Chemical Engineering at IIT Bombay. He holds a PhD in Catalyst from University of Wisconsin Medicine, and his expertise spans specialty on chemicals, petrochemicals, and green hydrogen. His work covers areas such as process design, industrial safety, regulations, and techno-commercial analysis. Alongside his academic role, Dr. Nabar runs a consulting practice advancing global startup companies and investors on Indian market strategies. He also served as the co-chair of the R&D committee at the Indian Chemical Council. With over 15 years of experience and accreditation as a chartered engineer, he brings a wealth of knowledge to today's session. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping rules. Please type your questions in the Q&A box at any time. We will address these during the Q&A segment at the end. A recording of this webinar will be shared with all registered participants in the coming weeks. Without further ado, let's dive into today's session. Dr. Nabar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prasadini, for the kind introduction. Let me just share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to talk about this. I think it's a fairly small group, so I'm hoping I'll finish in about 40 minutes, and so that we have enough time for a discussion after this. The goal of the talk today, I thought, there's been a lot of other talks almost every week. There's some announcement for a green hydrogen seminar or a talk. So I was trying to think what would be slightly different. So what I thought for the structure of the talk today is let's look at what are the actual projects on the ground without going too much. This is not really an R&D talk. So I'm not presenting original research. I'm presenting the views of some analysis that we did. We had some brainstorming sessions and a roundtable, multiple roundtables at IIT Bombay, and this is sort of what has emerged from the discussion. So there could be mistakes on some of the slide. A lot of this is anecdotal and not really peer-reviewed research. So we'll start with looking at some projects, right? What is the ground reality? What is the scale of projects? How are the announced projects doing? And this is a techno-commercial talk, so I will also touch on the pricing and the subsidies and some of those areas. Then we'll look at, what are the reasons for worry in certain areas, but there are also a lot of reasons for optimism, and how do we balance these two positive and negative aspects. And more so, there's a lot of learnings in the world, but sometimes when individual countries do their policies, whether it's India or Sri Lanka or other places, there can be, lessons which are missed. And let's try to see what we have learned from the green hydrogen story so far. And the last part is some, recommendations, and, treat them with a pinch of salt. There's going to be a lot of opinion in today's talk. And, how do we go forward, and what's the best course of action if you want to reduce the risk of delayed projects, or cost overruns or demand or things like that, right? So that's the structure of the talk. Let me start by showing you a photo of what I think is the NEOM project, one of the largest green hydrogen projects in the world. And I would just point out, say, the megawatt figure, around my estimate. I mean, not all the numbers are not always declared. There's also complications because some people speak in terms of electrolyzer capacity. At other times, people speak in terms of the solar capacity and things like that. But roughly, order of magnitude, this is about a 2 gigawatt project that's been built in the Middle East. And I'll refer to this. And the only reason I'm highlighting this project is, at least in my understanding, this is probably the largest project we have, which is near completion. So of course, there are much larger projects which have been announced, but from the latest reports, NEOM is roughly at 80% completion. So it's quite a unique project in that respect. And let's look at all numbers against the backdrop of a project like this. Now, what are causes for optimism? And I show you 4 example headlines, right? I could have put a lot more, but I just wanted to make a point. So there's a lot of new projects coming up. For example, the first one is a Hygenco project, right? Really large numbers, 1.1 million tons. Many of these projects, if you convert to electrolyzer capacity, they are roughly in the gigawatt range, or 500 megawatts, are really large projects, right? So a lot of them are announced. Almost every week there's a new announcement. So one conclusion is the new projects announcements are not slowing down. There's a lot of projects which are coming up, not just in India, but also in all other parts of the world. Second, at places like India, where ammonia is big, historically, a lot of the green ammonia being made was made by private sector guys with eye on exporting to other countries, whether it's European Union due to CBAM, or Singapore or Japan. But now we are starting a trend in the sense of domestic consumption, right? So some of these latest tenders have been for hydrogen, which will be converting to ammonia, and possibly into fertilizer for the local demand. And so I've quoted a lot of numbers in Indian rupees, but roughly, 100 rupees is about a USD, give or take maybe 0.9. So that's a conversion for those of you from outside, right? So looking at this, this is point 2. This is the price of green ammonia, not green hydrogen. So if you roughly convert it to the equivalent price of what the hydrogen would be at, that's around $3 to $3.5. But if you look at the later slides, even $3 or $3.5 is a very ambitious target. And a lot of people have been surprised, I would say pleasantly surprised, that it's becoming so economical. But I would also exercise some caution, because these are announcements. Now, we really have to see between now and 3 years how projects like these shape up, whether they can actually deliver at the price that they are bidding for. But this is not just India. If you look at the third bullet point, Austria, so many countries are doing their largest projects, and stuff is being announced. Look at the scale. The largest project in Austria is about 140 megawatts. And if you want to contrast that against NEOM, that's roughly 2 gigawatts, right? So there is a lot of, some of the large projects are really large, especially the announcements, and the actual construction projects, except NEOM, many of them are in the sub-gigawatt range, right? Even in Austria, or I'll show you some other announcements. Finally, NEOM, the photo I showed you, it's reached 80% completion, and Air Products and other guys are involved. And so that's, I would say this is good news. Now, let us contrast that with some of the other headlines that should give us some cause for, if not worry, course correction or introspection to figure out what's going on here, right? So the first 2 headlines are from Germany as well as Netherlands, where there are some large projects which have either slowed down, or they have reduced their capacity, or in some case, the project has been entirely stopped, right? And the global economy, there are economic reasons for this. There are also individual country policies which have made things difficult. A lot of factors going on there. But I think the key message is that not all announcements end up into projects. And so we have to really track some of the larger announcements to see how they evolve. For us, the learning is, why are some of these projects not working out and what can we do in order to do better? If you look at the third one, the NEOM project, which is at 80% completion, they are struggling to find off-takers, right? So they originally thought a lot of this hydrogen would be exported as ammonia, but apparently there is a demand shortfall. And roughly around the same time, May and June of this year, there have been news that they're going to now focus on domestic demand and things like that. So these are course connections, these are project changes. And the question is, what does it imply for other projects of this nature? The last one is not really a green hydrogen headline, but lot of the vehicular companies, right? Many of them have had trouble. And this may not be fundamentally to some flaw in the hydrogen itself. It could have been business models. The market may not have been ready, infrastructure, a lot of reasons. The point I'm making is sector to sector, there's a lot of differences, right? Vehicular, for example, has been struggling, whereas other sectors like refining or steel or ammonia are comparatively doing better at the moment. And it's difficult to say whether this is a trend or there's something going on there, but that seems to be what the headlines indicate. Now, in terms of sectors, I think there are a lot of opinions, but when I saw various end users, I sort of roughly divide them into three buckets. And this is not exhaustive. I've just illustrated some typical common end users, right? So what I mean in the first vertical bunch on the left, these are end users where green hydrogen can compete with alternatives, right? Automotive, the biggest alternative is electronic, e-vehicles and batteries. And of course, both technologies have their plus points, they have their negatives, and it's very difficult to say which is going to win in the long run. But if you look at ground reality right now, I think it seems clear that at least for the smaller vehicles, the batteries have an advantage. The question is what's going to happen with the little larger vehicles, trucks, for example, or heavy vehicles. And I think the jury is mixed. Till about a few years ago, people used to think that batteries will not come into this space. So hydrogen or other things, LNG were the only alternatives. But now I think that's a tricky area to predict what's going to happen in the future. Take heating. There have always been heat pumps as an alternative. Take aviation fuels. Of course, you can do green hydrogen and Fischer-Tropsch and other things, but you could similarly go from methanol to olefins, or you have biomass-based aviation fuels or SAF projects. And I think the jury is still out. So, right. So it's not clear which one of the technologies has an advantage, and we'll see how things go. Now, let's come to the hard to abate sectors. And I just take steel as an example. So this is the middle bucket. These are areas where hydrogen seems, the current alternatives have a lot of carbon emissions. And going ahead, hydrogen seems the most promising alternative. The challenge here is the downstream technology is still not ready, right? So the first projects, hybrid, for example, the first large blast furnace scale projects are just going online. So even if you use green hydrogen, it has to be a bit of a slow ramp up because you have to wait for the steel processing technology to be ready. But this is highly promising because to reduce emissions, other than hydrogen, there are very few options. So that's the good part. The bad part is if you look at the current price of steel and the current price of green hydrogen and run your calculations, there will have to be a commercial mismatch, and it remains to be seen. I mean, the very first projects probably get subsidies, but will they scale? If you want to cover the entire sector or 20% of the sector, the question is, will commercial viability be reached? And a lot of it also depends on what the pricing of green hydrogen will be going ahead. So that's that sector. The third bucket on the most right-hand side, I think, in my opinion, this has been a little bit of some parts of it have had attention, other parts not so much. But this is a sector where I say no alternatives in use, and it's already in use. So for example, take methanol or ammonia. For decades or 100 years, the processes to make them have started with hydrogen, right? So hydrogen is not new. We do not really need new regulations. The sector is used to using hydrogen. The safety risks are lower. On the other hand, all they have to do is shift from gray to green, right? And I believe this is an interesting sector because if you take a refinery, they have processes like hydrodesulfurization or hydrocracking, where it's not an issue of energy, but hydrogen is a must. So hydrogen has to enter the molecule or there's a hydrogenation reaction. So really the competition from other processes is not so much, but some of them can be commercially. I mean, cost is a factor in some of these processes. So if I go to the next slide, And I hope the slides are moving, right? Sometimes I have a tech glitch. Do let me know if the voice or sound, goes away. But now I'm looking at the existing uses of green hydrogen, and the world is using about 100 million tons. And this number, to put it in perspective, if you want to replace it with all green and electrolysis green, you would need something like 600, 500, 400, hundreds of gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. And that's my calculation. And less than 1%, and 1%, it could be a large number, it could be 0.1% of this 100 million tons is green. The broad sectors are shown on the pie chart on the left. And that's where I think the question for us is, when there is 100 million tons of gray, what is a good target? I mean, should we be going towards methanol or ammonia or some of these uses and just replace the gray with green? Because the technology downstream is ready. All you have to do is replace the source of hydrogen. And which also raises questions that with a lot of vehicular, etc., if it really kicks off, it's going to add to the 100 million tons, right? So there is going to be 100 million tons of existing use, and we are going to have additional tons which are stacked on top of it. Now, this is a techno-commercial talk. So the real big question for everyone is, how is price going to do in the future, right? Because you can't really make a prediction with current prices. I mean, which is why I show batteries, or I could have showed solar panels. If you look at the price per watt hour or kilowatt hour, and if you look at where it was in 76 versus 88 to now, it has dropped very drastically. And many of the green hydrogen proponents are making a similar argument. And that's where, if you want predictive accuracy, you have to go into the nuances of it, right? Because there are certain parts of technology which are new, where the price is going to reduce as we learn better, as we develop better membranes, more research, the scale of plants improves, efficiencies come in. But on the other end, there are other well-developed parts of technologies. I mean, think of steel pipes, for example, or think of pumps and compressors. Those have been used even for hydrogen in the refining industry for decades, maybe 50, 60 years, right? So how sharply will the price come down for those versus, say, membranes or stacks is a little different. And if you look at the unit capital cost, and this is a graph I took by a recent TNO survey, it's a very good report. The two largest components of CapEx are the electrolyzer system, 31%, and the other part next is the balance of plant. And of course, then you have other things, compressors and other things. The question each one of us has to ask, and nobody has a good, accurate answer, but I mean, if you know the technology, which parts of these are going to come down rapidly in cost? A lot of people think the electrolyzer system itself, there's a lot of learning which could happen and this price will drop. The rest of the components could be rather slow, because if you look at balance of plant, it's a lot of piping, cooling, heat exchangers. There is, of course, some economy of scale. So as you grow larger, these things will become cheaper. But that's how you look at it. The second way of looking at it is look at the levelized cost of hydrogen. And again, I'll caution that this is a survey for the European Union. So if you look at the y-axis, this last bar, 13.69, is sort of TNO's average. And this goes over all scales of projects. So like the larger projects, the number will be much lower than this. But the second thing is, this is Europe. Whereas if you look at the prices in other parts of the world, or India or Sri Lanka, those will be a lot lower. In India, I'm seeing prices like, say, $5 or $6. Subsidies make it a little difficult to estimate the actual cost. But if you look at the latest auctions, I mean, you're even seeing prices like $4, which is based on the SECI auction for ammonia. Now, the interesting part is the waterfall. So let's ignore the smaller bars for the moment and look at the two biggest ones. On the very left is this CapEx pie chart, which I showed you. So that accounts for around €5. And the next big one is the cost of electricity, right? So these are the two bars which have the lowest, which are the highest potential for reduction. Remember that if you want to apply this to your country, whether it's Vietnam or China or Sri Lanka or India, your bars will be smaller. So instead of 14 bars, these bars will be smaller. As a first approximation, you could assume that the relative contributions would be the same, but in reality, there are better studies because country to country, there are differences in how much the capex is versus the opex and things like that. But what's interesting is this is a qualitative. So look at it qualitatively. It would apply quantitatively if you are in Europe, but for other parts of the world, it's more of a qualitative estimation. But the price of electricity for the larger Indian projects, if you speak to the promoters, they're already into 3 to 4 INR, so rupee range, which means this graph is becoming, this part of the graph, the electric bar chart, is becoming quite competitive. So the question before us is, how much lower will the prices of renewables drop? If they do, then this part keeps reducing. for example, distribution and other things kick in. So for Europe, probably there's some potential. And then the other part of the puzzle is the pie chart that I showed you before, which is a capex reduction. Again, this is not to paint a rosy picture, not a pessimistic one. All I'm trying to make a point is, if you want to really predict the future, you have to go into these details and come up with your estimates or talk to experts about whether compressors are going to become cheaper or how much cheaper could electricity become. And then you'll get a better estimate of where green hydrogen prices are going to be in the future. Let's come to the next slide. This is something that the TNO report again did, which is what are the relative costs, and the x-axis is roughly the scale of the unit. And if you see the x-axis, this is going to about 200 megawatts. And there is a reason for that, which will be obvious in the next slides. The fact is we don't really have much experience in the about 200 megawatt range. The only country which does is probably China. And so there are some people who have experience there, but also a lot of that data may not be publicly available and there are other constraints, right? So to 200 megawatts, there is going to be a drop in relative cost, but this bar comes from 100 to 85%. So say a 15% reduction in the capex component. Projecting how is this graph going to look in the future in larger projects. If you go to a gigawatt, does it keep falling at the same rate? If you see here, it seems to be saturating, and which is what happens in most projects. The question is, what's the asymptote? At gigawatt, is it going to come down to 80% or is it going to come down to 70%? And there's really no mathematical, scientific way of doing it. It's all based on estimates and correlations and economic reality, right? And the risk is at these ranges where we don't have larger projects. So I would say roughly, or we have a project, but maybe it's a project or two. Once NEOM comes online, right? There are a lot of things. For example, what is going to be the memory in life? What are, how are components going to fail? A lot of the estimates which were made at the design stage, does reality follow that? Right? And so that's going to be in the about 200 megawatt range is what people are going to have to watch. Now, this is a graph that I had, someone in our group, one of the students create. And what it does is it compares, the top part is Indian projects, but the bottom part is global. And the scale is the same, but remember the x-axis scale is a logarithmic scale. And the project in green are the commissioned ones and the blue ones are announced ones. And I define a term called a scale gap, which is basically what is the largest project. So in India, for example, if you can see my cursor, the gas authority GAIL has a project at Vijapur, which is about 10 megawatts. And then if you go to the Indian largest announced project, right, this is your scale gap. And similarly for the rest of the world, the largest, so the top biggest projects are in China, of course, but if you go outside China, the largest US project, for example, is only 40 megawatts. There are few larger projects. I'll come to them in a later slide. So just as a caution, all this analysis was done around March of this year. So any projects in the last 6 months may not have been captured in this, but the picture looks roughly the same. And again, globally, some of the announcements are for 10 gigawatt, 20 gigawatt, right? So there is this huge gap between what is the largest running project versus the largest announced project. And why is this, why is this unknown? And I think something to watch for. If you look at chemical technology, most of the uncertainties happen in scale up. And if you look at polypropylene or ethylene crackers, a lot of other things, each successive project does become larger. But if you analyze these projects, maybe they're 20% larger, 50% larger, right? So that's an area where you are taking some risk, but if it's a 100 unit project, the next one becomes 120 or 150 units. Green hydrogen, we are in a very unique situation where, say in India, the largest projects is 10 megawatts, but you are already aiming for gigawatts of projects. Globally, the largest project outside China till recently was BASF in Germany at 50 megawatts. There has been one larger announcement recently in Europe. But then the biggest one, which is close to completion, is 2 gigawatts, right? Again, there is a big scale in which there is no operational experience. And so that's one risk that people will have to anticipate and figure out, how things are going. There is a scale at which no commissioned project exists, but the announcements and finance is racing ahead. And we'll have to closely watch this. Again, the scale is a log scale. So the real gap is much larger, right? This in India, this is a 10 megawatt. Whereas the real ones are thousands of gigawatts which have been announced. Now, just as a list, this is from the International Energy Database, roughly around 6-7 months ago. And these are global projects, excluding China. And if you see the largest ones, which were operational, right? So the NEOM one's not included because that wasn't operational as yet. We just have the same gap that I was illustrating in the previous slide. So that's that. Outside of China, if you see the largest project, and this is a photo from March when it was commissioned, this is at BASF Germany. I believe ThyssenKrupp is the vendor or Nucera on this one, and that's around 54 megawatt. And this is at Ludwigshafen, the primary site, integrated chemical site of BASF. I'm not exactly sure where they use the hydrogen, but the point is, this is again 54 megawatts, largest project in Europe for sure at that point. Now there's something around 300 megawatts, which is coming up in Spain pretty soon. Maybe it's under commissioning at the moment. But if you look at both these numbers, and then if you look at NEOM at 2 gigawatts, there is again this scale gap at which we don't have operational experience. The other interesting thing is, although there is a lot of news, if you see the news articles, end uses such as drones or cars, vehicular, right? They dominate the news, whereas a lot of the larger projects are happening in areas like chemicals, which may not be as glamorous, but these are existing users who have a use for the hydrogen. They just need to swap from gray to green. So that is another trend which is happening. I was doing some research, and in Japan, by my information, the largest project was around 16 megawatts, right? So BSF 54, this is 16. I could be wrong. There could be some larger projects, but I haven't discovered anything in the gigawatt or even 500 megawatt range in other countries. And again, this is a project for, it's not really vehicular. These are other industrial projects which are using hydrogen. The largest announced projects. Now, this is where I say put a smiley, right? You have to see how many of these are going to work. Some of them are already facing trouble, but these are, 67 gigawatts, 30 gigawatts, really large numbers. We don't even have a project at 1/10 of those capacity. So I don't think, I'm not being pessimistic. Maybe they will come up. All I'm saying is we have to wait and watch, because there is a huge range which has to be surpassed. And the point I'll be making on subsequent slides is we need to pay more attention to some of the smaller projects, mainly because they are going to give us the operational experience before we take these massive bets, right? So that's our window of opportunity while we are building these projects. What can we learn? Now, similar in India, these are all the commissioned projects. The largest one is the 10 megawatt GAIL project that I showed you on the graph before, right? And if you look at in the Indian database, the difference between announced versus under construction 6 months ago, this was roughly the distribution. And so there is this scale gap again. What is unique to India and some of the other tropical areas is the projects there, at least the private ones, were intended to export the hydrogen primarily as ammonia. There could be some doing methanol, but those projects are fewer. And of course, there is liquid organic carriers and liquefied hydrogen. But all of that, I think at this stage, is a bit of a minor interest in terms of actual deployment. But the point is, many of the Indian projects are exposed to CBAM because that's how they're going to export the ammonia to Europe. And this creates this unique situation where the national policy and subsidies and industrial policy is sort of linked to EU, right? Because what EU, how they define their green and what EU policy dictates is going to affect a lot of the promoters in India. And there's always been international trade, but this just introduces that regulatory uncertainty in terms of policy in a lot of these larger projects at the moment. Now, slightly switching gear, I point out things like chemicals, and I'm excluding ammonia or methanol. Those are the large commodity chemicals, but there's a bunch of smaller chemicals, for example, menthol, peroxides, and I'll show you some in the next slides. These are lower. There has been a good reason why there is not much attention, because the total hydrogen offtake is nowhere close to ammonia, or is nowhere close to steel or some of the larger sectors. Or if you could replace all vehicles with hydrogen, that will be massive. And chemicals is a small drop in the bucket, right? So these are very small sectors as a whole in terms of energy. But on the other hand, I think they're quite interesting, because if you start out with, say, where we are, 10 megawatts, and I put 4.5 as the Indian number. If you look at the European TNO report, they should be more like $13. And if you want to go to, say, a gigawatt, and I take the US Department of Energy target or other Indian targets, which are roughly in this range, right? $1 per kilo. The point is, if you go from 10 megawatts to these gigawatts or multiple gigawatts, you will have to pass through this intermediate range of projects. And in my opinion, chemicals makes for a good use case. And this is not just for scale, also to bridge this price gap, because what's going to happen is the very large users, right? Suppose you're going to make steel, or you're going to replace hydrogen in a refinery. These are sectors which already buy their hydrogen at $1 or $1.50. So, even $5 is way too expensive for them, and forget $13. So if you want to come down, you have to reduce your price. And for that, you need that experience curve. And again, so there are sectors such as chemicals and some other sectors, and I'll show you some pilot projects there, which to me are interesting. They may not be the end goal, but they may be an appropriate stop on the path, because they offer the right scale and they have an ability to afford higher prices than some of the commodity sectors. So that is what the point this graph is making. On the y-axis, I have the levelized cost of hydrogen, and on the x-axis, the size of electrolyzers. As an example, other than BASF, I've pointed out this project, and there are other projects. There are not as many as, say, the ammonia projects, but this is a project by Solvay, which is a chemical company. It's happening in Italy, and they're going to make green hydrogen peroxide. And if you see the traditional process for hydrogen peroxide, it anyway starts from hydrogen. So any hydrogen peroxide you buy in the world at the moment is made from hydrogen, most likely. However, that hydrogen is not green hydrogen at the moment. So even in all the places, that hydrogen would be from steam reforming or some gray source. And what Solvay is trying to do is not change the peroxide process, but just change the hydrogen intake, shift from gray to green, and then evaluate. The interesting point is they seem to have a good market for the green peroxide. And that's the point I make at the bottom, that we need more green hydrogen use in sectors where the end consumers either are willing or have I call it willingness to pay a higher price. And chemicals or sectors like these are very interesting, because if you're burning hydrogen as a fuel, essentially, all the value comes from the hydrogen itself, right? So suppose you have gray versus green, and the green hydrogen is twice the price of gray. All of that difference has to be borne by the end consumer. In a lot of other sectors, if you're doing hydrogenations, it's a large molecule, and the actual hydrogen content in the molecule may only be 5%. The second part is it's a complex supply chain. So you may be making peroxide. Now that gets mixed with solvents, surfactants, and then you have some sort of cleaning fluid. So in the final product, which the consumer buys, the proportion of hydrogen price can be very small, say it's 5%. So even if you have a price differential, it's easier to pass it down to the end user. And so I believe, these things are hard to hunt, but there are some signs that people are trying to, target sectors of this nature. And so this is the Solvay project. Moving beyond the standard chemicals, I mean, there's a lot of this is more exploratory, but I tried to look at, what other chemicals which use hydrogen. So all the ones listed in this table are chemicals that use hydrogen. The demand is a little million tons per year, but it's a little difficult to estimate because these numbers are not typically published. They are confidential information. But order of magnitude, the demand is large enough so that if you look at the tons of hydrogen, so when you look at chemicals as a small sector, it is a small sector compared to energy. But if you look at the deployed hydrogen plants at the moment, the green hydrogen plants at the moment, we just saw that the largest ones are 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts. As compared to that, chemicals is not small. In fact, chemicals is a very good match for sectors of that nature. Remember the Solvay plant I showed you? That's the bottom process. This is the process for making hydrogen peroxide. And if you look at a bit of the chemistry, there's the hydrogen addition here. And this is the one that Solvay presumably wants to replace from gray to green, right? So there are other commodity chemicals. And all of these are not new. So they are already being used. Toluene diisocyanate is used for a lot of polymers and polyurethanes and things like that. So it's not that you're generating new demand. These are already in use. They're already made from hydrogen. So there's no process uncertainty. All you have to do is shift from gray to green. So the only element is price, presumably. And but I suppose there should be more attention or more subsidies to target sectors of this nature. And this is probably a learning for us from what has been happening in the rest of the world. I'm coming towards the end of my talk, and three other points which I didn't get a chance to make earlier. One of them is pumped storage. What is happening is for all green hydrogen projects, the challenge will be by most rules, at least the European jurisdiction, if you what do you do at night, right? So you could shut down your ammonia plant, but that's very difficult because ammonia historically has been a continuous process. So the heating times, the catalyst, they do not react very well to frequent starts and stops. The electrolyzers themselves, depending on the technology, and that's where there's a difference between PEM versus alkaline. Some technologies are better for rapid ramp up, other technologies are not. But the biggest challenge is, so if you can't shut these things down, what do you do at night? Because if you have to run your plant, you still need hydrogen. Question is, can you store this hydrogen? Sure, hydrogen is all. There are a lot of ways to store hydrogen. Chemical and refineries do it. But once you start doing it at scale, if you start doing it for a gigawatt plant, the cost of storage is such, because hydrogen is a very small molecule, you have to use huge pressures, that capex is going to make your process difficult, right? So storing hydrogen itself is a challenge. Now the second question is, can you store the electricity? Batteries are getting cheaper, but I haven't seen any serious large projects that have thought about storing electricity as batteries for ammonia. So then, of course, the question is, what else can you do? And there are projects coming up in India, for example, where they're doing pumped storage. So at night, they would use the excess, and during the day, they would use excess electricity and pump up water to a reservoir at a higher elevation, and then use that at night to drive generators and then keep your power running, right? But that's still capex. But you have to look. There has to be some storage element for the green ammonia projects, unless you're doing grid banking. But if you look at the grid in India or other locations, a lot of the grids are gray. They are fired by coal-fired power plants or natural gas, and the rules will not allow you to use that. So the regulatory details of, say, the CBAM or European hydrogen policy, those introduce a lot of challenges. The second point is, country definitions can change versus other countries. And right now, EU is the single largest market because of CBAM. So a lot of ammonia, for example, is targeted for the EU markets. And if you go to the details about what qualifies as green, even between the European Union and India, there is a difference. So one of them is cradle to gate, the other is cradle to grave. The grams of the kilos of carbon emission per kilo of hydrogen is different in both the rules, right? A lot of things are different, and maybe there is a need for harmonization. But if not harmonization, at least project promoters or financiers have to look very carefully into the rules, because otherwise there is a risk of a project which comes up and may not be able to qualify, right? So that is the second point about why it is important to pay attention to all these rules. It's also about biomass, because the EU definition in principle has excluded anything other than electrolysis. And whereas the Indian definition, for example, is a little more agnostic to technical choice, technology choice. And so if you got your hydrogen out of biomass, which certain parts of the world like India have in plenty, it would still qualify as green, right? And of course, EU has an entirely different biofuels regulation. So it's not that that's not regulated, but it's a different regulation from green hydrogen. So the way I understand it at the moment, if you had biomass or any other way and you made hydrogen, even if it qualified, it would not qualify according to the EU rules. So there are a lot of nuances in the way the rules are defined. And at some point, I mean, the logic can be quite difficult to decide, which way. There are good reasons for, either approach. But I think that's how much complexity we can go in today's talk. Let's come to the last point, which is creating value from the co-product oxygen. And so this is a trend I find, that most of the existing plants, or the ones under commissioning, are not really valorizing the oxygen, because when you do electrolysis, you already always get a co-product. And there are challenges, because commercially oxygen is made using cryogenic processes or air separation, which is itself so efficient. And you don't have to pressurize the oxygen. So if you get it from hydrogen, there are challenges about impurities and other things. And this is very opinion based, but I don't think this oxygen is ever going to compete with commercial air separated oxygen. But the potential is having on-site processes, for example, in the petrochemical industry, or coupling this with some other processes, commodity chemicals, which can have a use of oxygen, which need not be pressurized, or it can be consumed on-site, so you don't have to transport it. And they may also tolerate some little lower purities and make this viable, right? So these are some other points that I'm seeing from ground reality. I'm not the first guy to notice this. A lot of promoters are already discussing what they could use this oxygen for. But I think the jury is still out, and there's a lot of creative brainstorming or research projects which could operate in this area. So with that, I think I'm on the concluding slide. I don't want too many take-home messages. I want to just focus on the main ones. The first one is, I think the future is bright, because whatever happens to vehicular or one or two sectors, hydrogen is so pervasive that even if all new uses were not there, there is 100 million tons of gray hydrogen in use in the world. And 100 million tons of gray is a huge carbon footprint. So whatever happens at the end, we have to replace those end users so long as we are serious about reducing our carbon footprint. And so the future is bright, but yeah, we have to look at sectors carefully in terms of commercial viability, and certain sectors we may be able to target before other sectors. And I think that's where, as a policymaker or a investor, a lot of the decision making lies, that which sector is going to be commercially viable first. Also, the larger end users or the policymakers, if you want to take a bet on a 2 gigawatt project, it's a massive investment. So you better be sure that all your calculations and the membrane life and a lot of other things are perfectly tested. And for these, the smaller projects could be interesting. Of course, many of these, the electrolytic stack, for example, it's not really a scale up, but it's what I call number up, because the largest stack is already ready and you're just putting more of those. So in that case, the risks are a little lower. So if you go to the second point, yes, there's 100 million tons of existing gray. And the question for us is, although we are generating new uses, what are we going to do about these? If we are serious, a lot of subsidies or projects should quickly, and this is in some sense low-hanging fruit, because you don't need a distribution infrastructure. That already, they're generating it on site. You do not need any special permissions or safety, because they are already using it. That technology uncertainty is gone. It's just a drop-in replacement for gray to green. So we have to see how much of that could happen. Third, there are risks in scale up, and this is going to mainly affect promoters, policymakers, and financiers. And so we need more attention to what are historic blind spots, which are more medium scale projects. We need more of, if you had 150 megawatt projects in Europe at the moment, I would be more happy, scaling up to larger sizes. But we are in this unique position where we need to really move fast for the environment. And we don't have that much experience in the middle scale. So yeah, we will get a lot of learning opportunities. And finally, policy incentives. I think there are a lot of smaller projects. The attention has been on the gigawatt projects, which is great because you need big changes for saving the world. But at the same time, the smaller ones, right, 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, or even 10 megawatts, we need more of those because you need a statistically significant number of projects in order to establish what is going to happen at larger scale. So with that, I think, yeah, I want to conclude my talk. And yeah, Prasadini, if there are any questions or discussion, I'm happy to take that. This is not really a result of any research. It's more intended to provoke a discussion. And these are my opinions. And of course, like in all predictions, I could be wrong. And let's see how things are going to evolve. So thank you. Thanks everyone for your attention. And yeah, over to you, Prasadini.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nabar, for a clear and inspiring presentation. We will now move into the Q&A session. Please type your questions in the Q&A box, and we will take them one by one. And if you like to speak directly, you can also use the raise hand feature, and I will invite you to unmute and speak directly with the speaker. Kalyan, now you can speak.
Yes, thanks, Prashadini. Hi, Rahul. Thanks for a wonderful explanation. Myself, Sundara, I'm calling from Netherlands. I work for a company called Tenet. We are more into energy transmission. So I saw a slide that you stated that the Tenet was also involved, in one of the slides. That part I couldn't understand, contributions of various components to the LCOH EU 2024. So if you see about Tenet, there was, I don't know the slide number.
Is it this? So are you able to see my slides? I'm just going through through the slides. I don't know whether the sharing has stopped. Prasadini,
okay. Next. Come front. Yeah.
No, so this is the start.
Oh, you're going back. I think you go to
okay. You are the other direction. Okay, sorry.
The other direction.
Yeah. So this is the slide on unit capital cost, and this was an LCOH slide. Do you mean this one? The EU
this one. Yeah, this is Tenet, right? This is the company I work for. So I don't understand what you mean in this table.
Right, right. So this is a report by TNO, and it's
Yeah,
available in the
okay.
public domain and was published in 2024, I believe. And
Okay.
so this is like a waterfall chart. So what they have estimated is the levelized cost at whatever. I mean, there's a lot of details involved, so I hesitate to summarize it. But so if you look at the 13 euro per kilo number, so the y-axis is euros per kilo, the levelized cost of hydrogen. This is how it's getting built up. So they have, like, on the x-axis, this is the unit capital cost, so the contribution to capex, and then there is operations and maintenance. There is the electricity cost. So these are all, they'll all sum up to 13, right? The
Okay,
green
now I
bar is
got it.
13.
Now I
Now you
got
get
it.
it?
Okay,
Yeah.
because Tenet is a transmission, so I think that is the cost they have also included in that, because Tenet is
Exactly. Yeah.
the monopoly here in Netherlands. Yeah, okay, got it.
Correct. But it's
Ah,
I would just caution that these ones are very difficult to interpret, because it all
I get it.
depends on what scale of project, and from 2024 to 20, it's a rapidly evolving field. So I would just take the qualitative number, and for your individual project, the numbers could vary quite a lot, because like a 10 megawatt to a 200 megawatt project, the numbers change. But roughly these will be the contributors.
Yeah, I get it.
Huh?
And
This was an
also,
average. Yeah.
thank you so much. And also, the last question is here in the
Yeah.
Netherlands, I know a few of my friends working for companies like Air Products, etc. I think that the company is also not doing well with regards to these projects. My friend told me that there are many projects which is being called off. So, how do you see that uncertainty here in the
Yeah.
Europe? Also, it might have an impact in India later, right?
Yeah. So I think that's a good point, and it's good that you're saying it, because sometimes I'm a little hesitant to put it on so it's good to get some local feedback. So I see it in two ways. I mean, first, Europe has a project cost problem, right? Projects are expensive to execute in Europe, which seems to be happening. I mean, there are reasons for that. Second, in terms of solar, for example, the price of renewables itself is much cheaper. So for example, this $5 contribution to LCOH will be much cheaper in India. And for some reasons, India has a natural advantage of having more solar insulation, but also other things. So that's one part of the problem, that Europe has competition from places like Morocco or India or Sri Lanka or other places which can make green hydrogen cheaper. But the second challenge, I think, is more fundamental about if you make green hydrogen, a lot of promoters are saying now the end users have to come. So if you have NEOM and you've put in a large project, the ammonia uptake has to match. And that's where I think we have to be very careful in terms of this pyramid of end users. You have to, as a promoter, take a decision that no matter what the announcements are, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, which are going to be sustainable end users, where the consumer will pay a price premium. Because I think there's no free lunch. In a lot of sectors like steel, steel, the technology is not ready. But if you take refineries, hydro desulfurization, the technology is absolutely ready, but there is a price gap. Now, the question is, how will that gap be closed? Either due to a carbon price or due to government policies, or if you can make the consumer pay. And that's always hard, right? If you can have a green labeled fuel, is the consumer going to pay 2 times that or 1.5 times that? That's the question which is in front of us.
Got it.
Dr. Nabar, I just had a question. It is not covered in your slides, but it is like I wanted your insight on this. So, given the growing interest in retrofitting existing diesel fleets with onboard hydrogen electrolyzer kits to reduce emissions, how do you see the scalability and safety of such hybrid system evolving in the next decade? So, especially in light of like international certification standards or OEM resistance, what is like, I just wanted your insight on this.
Yeah, so hydrogen, so in some sense is a fuel that we have been using for a long time, right? The refining. And so what is happening is, because of vehicular, it is getting democratized. So a lot of smaller users, laymen, right? It will go outside the confines of a plant or a refinery. So indeed, safety is a major challenge. But I think safety can be surmounted, because it's not that it's a toxic fuel, like in terms of whatever things we handle or even transport globally. Hydrogen is flammable. It has its unique challenges, but it can be managed. I think we have a lot of expertise in the world and organizations who are experts at hydrogen. So I think that part of the problem, of course, there'll be some accidents. If you cut corners, there are going to be disasters, and one disaster can just stall the whole project for the rest of the world or a country. So we have to be very careful. But the second challenge, I think, which is more difficult to fix, is the infrastructure, right? The distribution infrastructure, and what do you do on the pricing side and things like that. Because the TNO report, right, this pricing, the pricing at source versus what is the delivered pricing at a pump has been one of the challenges for a lot of the startups. If you see vehicular startups, a lot of them have struggled struggled. And so anybody new getting in that area has to understand why they have struggled and what the lessons are, right? So I think the safety can be managed. It's going to be probably not as safe as batteries, but batteries have their other challenges too. So there are pros and cons, but if we go in that direction, we have to do it very carefully, because if the public confidence is lost because of one fire, then it's very difficult for all the other players to get it back.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there's another question from Dr. Tirupati. Please, you can speak now.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
So, what energy mix is the optimum solution for green hydrogen plants? Like the solar plus the BESS. Maybe if I wanted to keep the huge BESS capacity, I can manage with the solar, since the solar is cheap in India. Or otherwise, should I take the solar and wind is some ratios and little bit of amount of the BESS, which is the optimum solution for the green hydrogen or green ammonia plants?
Okay. So I think it's a very geography specific answer. It really depends on, are you doing, I mean, I can tell you, I can't give you a specific answer, but I can tell you that it depends on whether you're doing on-site solar, which is quite rare. Most people have a power purchase agreement. So then it depends on what is the mix of agreements that you can do and whether you can, but from a regulatory point of view, there's only 2 or 3 options. I mean, you could do solar, you could do wind. In India, solar seems to be moving a little faster than wind for whatever reasons. And the only third one is, pump storage or hydro. So that's sort of your option. And yeah, sorry, I don't have a better answer. I think the exact mix changes from what is optimal for one plant may not be optimal for the other. It depends a lot about what pricing you get, what your project horizons are, things like that.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
fine. And should we take the advantage of the turn down ratio of ammonia synthesis loop for generating green ammonia, or otherwise should I need to operate the ammonia synthesis loop at 100% capacity? So which one is optimal?
So I think turn down is of course better. It just depends on what natural turn down you have. I mean, see, you could operate at 100%, but then you're going to need a lot more storage. So as batteries become cheaper, the optimal turn down might get better. But at the moment, since storage is expensive, if you could develop an ideal ammonia process which just shuts down and starts up again, that could be the optimal ideal. Of course, it's not realistic. So then I would say that at the moment, taking advantage of turn down is a good idea. The only question is you have to talk to licensors, guys like Halda Topso or the ones who are on the ammonia side to figure out what's a good turn down that they can offer. And in fact, there are some specialized licensors who are now modifying their historic processes, because if you are using ammonia from gray, if you are a fertilizer company, turn down is not that important an issue, because you're not going to ramp down every night. You only ramp down in response to demand or certain other problems. But green hydrogen has brought in this turn down ratio. So I think my feeling is you have to run a calculation which balances the cost of getting a higher turn down ratio versus the cost of storage. And this is not a static number. Like that number is going to evolve as storage becomes cheaper.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Tirupati, for your question. And
Yeah,
we
just
have
last question. And the energy storage is the viable, maybe at this scenario, maybe you might have seen some of the projects either announced or something. It's like the either BESS, or I need to go for hydrogen storage, or I need to go for pumped storage. So what is your view on that?
Yeah, so my view is things like batteries are probably, I haven't seen any major projects that are using batteries. You could do it at small scale, but the price is too high at the moment. But be very careful, because batteries get cheaper by the day. So like, I didn't think grid storage was viable, but in Texas, ERCOT is doing a lot of grid storage using batteries. If you come to pressurized hydrogen, the technology is already there. It's only about the capex. You have to run capex calculations, and that's where historically steel cylinders, but now moving to class 3, class 4, your capex may come down. So that's your second option. But the largest plants I've seen, like anybody speaking of 500 megawatts, the only option I think is pump storage at the moment. I mean, at least looking at the plants in India, there could be other. I mean, the technology is there for all these 3 options. It's only a question of price. So what price does somebody offer your battery versus how much is it going to cost you to do your reservoir and pump storage?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that, we will close the Q&A session. And it is now my pleasure to invite my colleague, Preetika, to deliver the vote of thanks. Preetika, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nabar, for your clear and insightful presentation. Your deep knowledge, optimism tempered with prudent caution, and practical examples offered a balanced and thought-provoking perspective on green hydrogen. We greatly appreciate the time and effort you dedicated to preparing and delivering such an enriching session for us today. Thank you so much. I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to all our participants. Your presence, engagement, and thoughtful questions are what makes these webinars truly meaningful and insightful. Without your active involvement, this event would not have been possible. On behalf of Greenstat Asia, sincere thanks once again to Dr. Nabar and to our audience. We look forward to welcoming you to our upcoming sessions. Until then, please stay safe and have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prasad.